Russian meddling. In the months leading up to the 2016 election, there were rumblings of Russian meddling. Since the Trump victory, Russian meddling has dominated the news and driven the Trump administration and the Democrat Party to distraction. Meddling has come as a startling revelation to the naive and a handy cudgel to the cynical. My greatest surprise is that anyone is surprised. The Russians have been meddling for at least the last 5 centuries. Internal spying on emigres, military and industrial espionage, hoaxes, false flags, double agents, penetration of foreign governments and NGOs. That's just what they do, and they're good at it. They've been doing it for a long time. Ivan the Terrible created an espionage and security service in the 16th century to collect information on internal dissidents and troublesome emigres. Peter the Great and Catherine the Great expanded these activities to include early forms of military and industrial espionage. Peter actually traveled to the Netherlands incognito to gather information on Dutch commercial practices firsthand. As with the Soviet Union later, the Romanov dynasty realized that it is often easier to steal useful technology rather than to create it. Whether it was 17th century shipbuilding in Holland or atomic secrets at Los Alamos, Russians have proven to be both clever and relentless. Internal unrest along with assassination plots in the 19th century fueled Romanov paranoia. One of the byproducts was a scurrilous tract written by the Tsar's secret police known as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Originally intended to encourage domestic aggression against Russian Jews through preposterous claims, it became a cornerstone of international anti-Semitism. After the creation of the Soviet Union, Russian espionage and subversion went into high gear. Spying on emigres, recruiting foreign agents, compromising, then pressuring foreign politicians and military personnel became their stock in trade. Techniques such as appeals to sympathetic British university students, appeals to sympathetic entertainers, exploiting sexual practices or orientation of diplomats and military personnel, or even just simple bribery. They all became highly refined Russian skills. Through stealth and, when necessary, violence, Soviet and Russian interests were advanced. The former head of the Red Army, Leon Trotsky, fled to Mexico to avoid a show trial and certain death, only to be caught and murdered by a mountain axe to the head. Anti-Soviet writer George A. Markov was stabbed in the leg while walking in London by a poison-tipped umbrella. Even after the fall of the Soviet Union, retribution practices continued. Former KGB agent Alexander Litvinenko and Ukrainian politician Viktor Yushchenko were poisoned. Putin has provably killed scores of critics, including rivals, businessmen, and even journalists. Don't underestimate the Russians. Remember, they are a nation of chess players. During the cooperative space programs with the U.S. in the 1970s, NASA engineers were astounded by the Russian space program's ability to cobble together a functioning technology on the cheap. They're very clever. In the West, a popular misconception has grown that Russia is a country of ham-fisted, boorish drunks. Although that is an element of Russian character, it is certainly not indicative of the nation as a whole. The idea of Khrushchev banging his shoe on a podium at the UN, or the clownish drunken behavior of Boris Yeltsin is somehow representative of all Russians is disarming and dangerous. When I was a political science undergrad in the 70s, one of my professors was ex-Army Intel. He shared fascinating stories of his service in the then West Germany. One account I recall is how the Red Army would line up massive armored columns inside East Germany and then make a run at the border. After studying NATO communication traffic and troop movements, they would stop at the border, then return to the base. They did that repeatedly. Cold War tensions in Europe meant that each of these exercises had to be taken at face value. One of the most interesting discussions we had between professors and students was over the motivation of the Soviet government's diplomatic behavior. Some argued that it was Marxist-Leninist ideology and the desire for worldwide revolution. The history department invariably bought into this belief. Others argued it was driven by Russian nationalist tendencies. We now have a definitive answer: Russian nationalism. Russian influence is disproportionate to their declining military, economic, and scientific strength. Although they still have an impressive nuclear arsenal and a space program, they are an economic basket case. Their economy is about the size of Italy's. Although they have significant oil and gas reserves, their crude oil has high levels of impurities that are expensive to refine out and make it not an especially desirable commodity. Although Vladimir Putin is ex-KGB and grew up in and has pride in all that the communist state accomplished, he is undoubtedly nothing more than a nationalist, oligarch, and thug. He directs Russian meddling in a nation that has over 500 years of experience in these matters, always looking for targets of opportunity to sow seeds of discontent or otherwise put opponents on their proverbial back foot. It seems that Russian behavior is unfocused and often contradictory. On one hand, it seems as they favor Trump by offering helpful dirt on Hillary Clinton. On the other hand, through Christopher Steele, they help construct a plausible but fallacious dossier that has kept the Trump administration in turmoil for over 2 years. On one hand, they hack into DNC computers. On the other hand, they try to put Donald Trump Jr. in a compromising situation by taking a meeting with a Russian operative who presented herself under false pretenses. Unfocused? Contradictory? Not in the slightest. The primary thrust of Russian behavior is to further self-interest by any means available. In the case of Russian meddling, it is to deceive, confuse, and stoke political animosity among their adversaries. In the case of American elections, they have succeeded with the aid of cynical and short-sighted politicians. I don't doubt for a minute that Representative Schiff and Senator Nadler know full well that their assertions of collusion are total nonsense. They are willing to be useful fools for the Russian government, only so that they can gain temporary political advantage. The Russians are equal opportunity meddlers and cyber criminals, and not always at the direction of their government. The Russian criminal element also has a very long tradition of exploiting any advantage that they come across. Cybercrime has become an additional revenue stream, along with strong-arm theft and drug dealing. In addition to organized crime, even Russian teenagers and 20-somethings have honed their hacking skills for recreation and profit. Russian troll farms are sophisticated and effective. Putin's goal has been to confound, confuse, sow discord, and sabotage foreign governments. The best examples are the activities at the Russian Internet Research Agency. They perpetrate hoaxes and fake news. They put out false stories on social media posing as pro-Trump, anti-Trump, pro-Hillary, anti-Hillary, pro-life, pro-choice, Black Lives Matter supporters, white nationalist supporters. They drive cybersecurity and social media compliance personnel crazy. Joe Rogan, Sam Harris, and David Rubin have podcasts in their archives that give a good overview of Russian troll farms. The most serious attacks on the West, however, are at the direction of the Russian government. Everything from semi-legitimate news sources like RT, Sputnik News, and social media to more nefarious methods under the aegis of Russian security. They're clever and relentless. An equally robust effort and eternal vigilance by the targets of Russian meddling are necessary. In addition to vigilance, I suggest a major political shift and realignment to safeguard liberty. My proposal is audacious, but compelling. As audacious as arch-anti-communist Richard Nixon opening relations with communist China. In a future post, I will explain why we should reverse the policy of triangulation that Nixon and Kissinger so successfully implemented with China. The focus of American foreign policy must always be to advance the best interest of the American people. Sometimes that means doing business with some pretty unsavory characters. More next time.